You might want to consider using two Shoguns when shooting on a Sony. Hear me out. If I'm not mistaken, it's not common knowledge that SLOG out of Sony cameras is broken through the HDMI. This happens on, from my understanding, all of the Sonys. This happens on the Sony Alphas, including the 7SR. This happens on the 6000 series. This happens on the FS7. If I'm not mistaken, it happens on the FS5. SLOG through the HDMI out breaks. It has to do with the way the SLOG signal is recorded through the HDMI. There's no metadata file attached to it. It doesn't tell the signal to be read as a full signal versus a limited signal, 16235 versus 0255. So it reassigns values to be different, increasing contrast, crushing the signal, defeating the purpose of shooting on SLOG. It's not giving you the intended log. It's not giving you what you are paying for. You buy a camera with log. Not only are you limited by 8-bit, but then it comes out and it gets crushed in the recorder. I've had this camera for 2 years now. I got it back sometime in 2014 along with the Shogun. There was no fix for it. Atomos had no official response. Sony had no official response. I talked to some Sony engineers. They weren't entirely sure what was causing it. They thought it was on the recorder side. The recorder said it was on the camera side. There was no official fix. There was some solutions that kind of tried to make the signal look the same, but in the back of my head I was thinking, like, why isn't there a LUT to fix this? Somebody could easily make a LUT. What do you know? Cinema 5D created a LUT that fixes it. If you look it up, Cinema 5D LUT fix, you'll find it. It is the C5D SLOG fix. You just load it onto your recorder and it fixes the problem. It reassigns all the values and makes SLOG look like SLOG the way it's supposed to through the HDMI out. Okay, after all that, now my camera outputs to this one. I know this looks kind of all messy, and this is the signal coming from the camera. So I have the LUT fix here, and there's two ways to use this fix. You can either shoot like normal and then apply it later, baking it in, having to retranscode all your footage with the new LUT, and then doing your color grading after that. Or you could bake it in like this. The disadvantage of baking in the LUT is that is your LUT. You can't use the corrective LUT and then use the LUT that you want to use for viewing, or use the whole Atomos HDR, which allows you to tweak the dynamic range of the scene, because you are using the LUT by Cinema 5D. So a proposed workaround that I have here is that you have the first one receive the signal from the camera, apply it, record it into the signal, bake it in, because this is the fix and you don't want to have to spend time transcoding it later, and then also output the look, HDMI out from here into here. This is now receiving the same exact signal that this one is recording. But because it's already corrected before it even hits the device, I can now apply a LUT on top of this or use the HDR feature. I will turn this on and off so you can kind of see the difference here. So that's the LUT fix on and off. So you can see the darks get much darker, the whites blow much quicker. So if you look over here out that bright spot, so you see that clipping area gets much larger, dark area falls to dark way faster, crushing the black information, pushing it all the way down into that 8-bit shadow noise area that you don't want, because you are shooting on an 8-bit camera. Not only are you limited by 8-bit, then the signal gets crushed and pushes everything into the shadows. This is one reason why people are complaining that these cameras tend to be noisy when using an external recorder, because the signal gets crushed. Recap: HDMI out, recorder number 1, could be your fancy AC focus pulling monitor, bakes in the fix, outputs the fix, goes into your second operating monitor, already has the fix coming in as the HDMI signal right off the bat, and then you can use the HDR feature for viewing ease. You can actually utilize this as well as have the corrected signal. This defeats the need to transcode the LUT later or bake it in and have to look at a even flatter image. Just to show, you can HDMI trigger on the body and it will trigger recording on both devices. You should be doing that. You should never hit record on the monitor. You always enable HDMI trigger, and you always trigger on the body. If you don't know that, I'm making another video explaining why you should absolutely do that. Always record on the body. So some other situations, this could be your master, for instance. I could have it as the 4K UHD ProRes HQ master, and then I could output a downres 1080 ProRes LTE proxy. So this could be an instant proxy. It isn't as high quality as, say, transcoding the 4K footage down to 1080 to get 444 1080, but it is giving you a 1080 backup. Editor DIT doesn't have to do any transcoding right off the bat. You have a 4K version and a 1080 version, which isn't a bad deal. Or you could do both 4K, so you have an instant backup, because in this situation, I'm using an A7S Mark I. I don't have the 4K compressed backup in the body. I only have one file. So if this dies or breaks or Note 7 explodes, whatever, it's lost. But in this situation, not recording internally, outputting 4K to here, and then also 4K backup to here. So I instantly have two backups. That's a plus also. On the topic of cables, they both work. I mean, this doesn't look pretty at the moment. I'm just kind of throwing it together. I have two power cables. Powering this, I have both types of video cables plugged in just to show that they both work. But I have the HDMI out working right here. I could change the input to SDI and it still works. This is reading it as 1080. If I turn off the compression, it's now reading it as a SDI 4K signal. It doesn't say what device it is when in SDI mode, but the trigger still works. If I turn on trigger, so you can see right there, I just recorded on the body. All devices are recording, so that still works. It's just fine. I think I would prefer using the SDI. It's a little bit more stable, sturdy. I like how it's in the back and not protruding out the side. I mean, I could pick up more of these 270-degree HDMIs, but then I have to buy more gear. Now, power, this is gonna eat a lot of power. If you have maybe some bricks, some Anton Bowers or something, but it's still a lot of power. I am using the Atomos power station, and that works just fine for using the camera and the Shogun together, but I tried just running the camera on its own battery and then hooking both of these up to the power station. 1080 works just fine. Both work idle, hit record, they both trigger, they both record. If I'm not mistaken, if I have one in 4K and one in 1080, it works. Hit record, they both trigger, both record. But if I have them both in 4K mode, they turn off the moment I hit record. I don't think the power station can output the amperage needed to power both devices in 4K recording mode. I didn't try turning the brightness down, but I like to operate with full brightness anyways, so I didn't even bother. And this is why I think you should be considering using two Shoguns and not one.